In 1958, when Elvis was 22, his mother Gladys, his one true love, died. Without her to guide him, he began his search to replicate his mother's love from his childhood.
The 50s Elvis was a very sexual Elvis. In an era when no one talked about sex, when people were buttoned up, buttoned down, fully clothed all the time, everything was high, girls wore white gloves. It was such an era of conservatism and almost innocence. The 60s Elvis was greatly torn. He had met Priscilla Beaulieu in Germany. Priscilla Beaulieu was the stepdaughter of a military man stationed in Germany, and Elvis met her shortly before he returned home. He brought her to the States when she was 15, 16 years old, expected her to be both a child and a woman. He wanted a petite woman with dark hair, as he remembered his mother being when he was very small. Several members of Elvis's entourage worried about the fact that Elvis spent more and more time with increasingly younger girls. He saw himself as more like a teenager. So, in a sense, he was searching out a woman, a girl, who was the same age he was.
In his Hollywood years, Elvis cultivated a teenage entourage.
Sandy Kay Stevens was a young girl working as an extra at Paramount when Elvis made Loving You. He liked her. She was a perky little blonde girl, and he invited a lot of those young girls who either worked there as extras or as dancers or who hung around the set. He invited them over to his hotel, and they became kind of a family for him.
I first met Elvis when I had a small extra part in Loving You. I was 13. I was so surprised to see how beautiful this man really was. All my expectations that I thought flew out the window. He was above what I ever could have imagined. It was all new and very exciting, and I just knew that I wanted to get to know this man. He made you feel like, gee, you wanted to be kind of grown up and, you know, so that he would like you.
Appearing in the same film was a rising young starlet, Dolores Hart.
I met the most charming young man named Elvis Presley. Well, you would have heard that the roof came tumbling down, and they said, "Are you kidding? You must be out of your mind. You don't know who that was?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Kid, you're crazy. That is the biggest guy in town."
I got to know him by getting invited back to the hotel. They were very strict there. They didn't want the young girls under 18 to go in his room. When we rode up the elevator, and his mom said to Elvis, "Isn't she an itty-bitty little thing?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I think I'll call her Little Bit." So that was my name. For the next 6 years that I was around Elvis, that's what he called me.
There was a charisma that was unbelievable, and he just sang from the depths of him. And when he moved, it was beautiful.
When I met him, he just turned 22. You know, sometimes he liked to just talk and cuddle and just depending on his mood, you know. He was very sweet, and he made you feel like a little princess. The weekends were really the time that he liked to play. He'd have everybody up. He'd play pool, or he'd play the piano and sing. I even got to sing with him a couple times. I was so excited. We all wanted to be with him and enjoyed the time that we did get to be with him. He loved to kiss, and he was a great kisser.
I think it was on that set that we had the most incredible experience of finding out that we both blushed when we kissed. Our first kiss at the end of the film, I turned absolutely purple in the kiss, and they had to stop the camera. And of course, everybody howled with laughter and thought this was the biggest laugh of all. Well, then, of course, Elvis started to blush, and he had to be remade up.
Elvis was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, it was a revolving door all the time. You know, if one girl had to leave early that he happened to be sitting with that evening, 5 minutes later, there was somebody else sitting down. Was the date for the 5 minutes or an hour or the evening. I think most of the girls were under 18 or maybe just about 18. And yes, he was having sex with them. Whatever Elvis wanted to do, I just wanted to make him happy. Every time he'd leave, finishing a picture, and leave for Memphis, I would cry, and it was the same thing, but he always would hug me, and he'd say, "I'll be back in a little bit."
The kids, they wanted just to touch him. They wanted a lock of his hair. If he had gone down on the streets, he would have been completely dismembered.
He didn't want to get married. He would get married if he could look at somebody 24 hours a day across the table. I said, that'll never happen. Here I am, just this kid, but I'm giving him advice. He liked it, but he was young. He listened. Not well, but for me, it was a deep love. I'll love Elvis till I die.
While his many girlfriends awaited Elvis's return from military service, it appeared that he'd found love abroad.
Priscilla, while quite young, was quite the little seductress. She knew what she wanted. She plotted meeting him. He absolutely could not resist her. She was, in many ways, his downfall, I think. But that was a very serious relationship for him. He also saw a kind of confused young girl. She had just learned that her father was not really her biological father, but that he was her stepfather. So she was mourning the passing of her real father, just as he was mourning the passing of his mother. His mother had just died. When he does finally move her to Memphis, he's told her stepfather that she will live with his father and Vernon's new wife, and that she will go to Immaculate Conception School and wear a uniform and be supervised. Well, she did live with Vernon and Dee, but for a very short period of time. She was spending her nights over at Graceland with Elvis. But the fact that he had her in uniform going to a Catholic school seemed to pacify the wagging tongues in Memphis, and nobody really questioned what was going on there.
Searching for a meaningful relationship in a sea of sex and adulation led Elvis nowhere, and he retreated from the frenzy of live performance to the relative security of movie making. His fame grew, but privately, he was still very much alone. As the 60s progressed, Elvis found himself torn between two different women who served two different emotional needs. One he felt he could shape, the other was like looking in a mirror.
If he had a relationship that really had some steam behind it as far as a future and perhaps a healthy future, it would have been that relationship with Anne Margaret. Unfortunately, he did not end up with Anne Margaret because he had pledged himself to becoming Priscilla's husband.
He really loved Aunt Margaret, no question. He respected her, he liked her, he enjoyed being with her.
When Anne Margaret and Elvis met on the set of Viva Las Vegas, Anne Margaret had just made a big splash in Bye Bye Birdie, which was loosely based on Elvis's own story. She was terrific looking, just a wonderful dancer, a fiery redhead, every inch his equal in talent. He was really taken with her. I mean, I think he felt she was the woman perhaps he had searched for all of his life. She was very sweet, so she could mother him a little bit, but she was also very sexual, which was important to him. And again, she was almost his mirror image in some ways.
We were in the back lot of MGM for all-night filming. It was about 11, 12 o'clock at night, and I heard some commotion, and I turned and I looked, and Anne Margaret came to visit Elvis. And everyone looked. And I saw Elvis saw that she was there, and he just blushed, and you know, you could see he was really affected. He was melting within himself. And she comes in, and she just glowed. She was so beautiful.
They really couldn't take their eyes off each other. It was just fireworks from the beginning. You could see the electricity between them. You could just see it crackle on the screen.
I had a little part in Viva Las Vegas. I played a cocktail waitress. So when Elvis was singing to Anne Margaret near the bar area, you'll see this little blonde walk out, my hair's pulled up, and I had a little cocktail outfit on.
On the one hand, he had Priscilla, who he thought he was rearing. But on the other hand, he had Anne Margaret, who was the female Elvis, who was the only woman in his entire life who was an equal to him. But he sabotaged it because his mother had told him not to marry anybody in show business.
And he went through a battle because Priscilla was in his life and Margaret was in his life.
And he certainly wasn't going to just play second fiddle to someone else in show business. His ego couldn't have stood that.
On the back lot of MGM, they had a very small trailer that was about 20 years old. Elvis, Ann, and myself walked in. It was so cramped that Elvis sat in front of this mirror with light bulbs. Ann was right next to me, and I'm doing Elvis's hair, and I had to do his hair right. And I was so nervous, and I could feel her breast on my back. She was pressed up next to me, and the electricity was flying off the walls in that room between those two. They were so attracted to one another. It was beautiful to watch.
If he was going to be dating her or seeing her on a weeknight, nobody else was allowed to be near the house or in the house, or he even made the guys leave.
I think they were truly enamored with each other, and from the second that they met, that was a deep and true love affair. They spent a lot of time together. She took him home to meet her parents almost immediately. They were off having secret affairs in hotel rooms. This was a hot relationship, and probably could have lasted into a real marriage. He never got over her.
As real as the Anne Margaret love interest was, Elvis faced a dilemma of his own, a promise he'd made.
I know that Elvis really loved Priscilla. There's no question about it. He loved her till he took his last breath. But he was Elvis. And temptation got the better of him.
Elvis really had no intention of carrying through on his promise to marry Priscilla. But the Colonel and her stepfather, Priscilla's stepfather, held his toes to the fire.
He had promised Priscilla's dad that he would marry her, and he told me he never meant it because it was supposed to be all in fun.
She was living there in Memphis all those years. She was about to be 21. The Colonel got worried. Jerry Lee Lewis had just had his career ruined by marrying an underage girl. The cat was out of the bag in some circles, and Priscilla's stepfather really said, if you don't follow through on this, we're going to give you some very bad publicity.
The father threatened to blackmail him, to do away with his career.
But because his parents had reared him to not question authority, to not have much of a backbone, he went along with his promise and what the Colonel wanted him to do.
We had a little chat one night, and he went on and carried on and was very upset about the situation because something had happened down at Graceland. I didn't quite understand why he felt, he couldn't get out of this situation, but not realizing that at the time, we were all underage, and, she's living there at the house, and so he felt he had to do what he had to do.
Even though he was in love with Anne Margaret and he loved Priscilla, it never stopped him from having one-night stands or 2 or 3 or many multiples of women in a single night.
Elvis dated many other stars, including Natalie Wood, Raquel Welch, and Sybil Shepherd. There would be many women in the life of Elvis Presley, but there was only one Anne Margaret. In the 1970s, Elvis approached middle age exhausted, alone, and confused. The expectations of being Elvis were too great for him or anyone who might date him. His fans provided the comfort and love to keep him going.
The very thing that made him happy in the beginning and fueled him with energy drained him and left him empty.
Elvis didn't know what it meant to have a fully realized, adult, romantic, emotional relationship, because he was still stuck in those teenage years.
The audience may have become a vicarious Gladys.
I don't think there's an artist in the history of rock and roll, or perhaps in the history of entertainment, who loved his fans as deeply and as sincerely as Elvis Presley.
Everybody knows me as Rockin' Robin Roseanne.
Robin Roseanne was one of the most dedicated of fans who went to Las Vegas every year and saw multiple shows. He got to know her face because she was up close to the stage so many times, and he asked her name at one point, and she said Robin, so he named her Rockin' Robin.
First became an Elvis fan when I was about 10 years old when I saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show at my grandmother's house. But at 10 years old, I didn't know who or what an Elvis was, and it wasn't until later when I was a teenager and I would save my babysitting money and buy all the 45s and the albums and go see the movies.
Shirley Dew was Joe Esposito's girlfriend, and Joe Esposito, of course, was Elvis's right-hand guy. And as Joe's girlfriend, Shirley got access to a lot of scenes behind the scenes.
I first met Elvis through Joe Esposito. Joe Esposito was my boyfriend at the time. We met in Las Vegas. Joe was basically the boss of the guys, the Memphis Mafia.
First time I went and saw Elvis Presley was in Las Vegas, February 1970. We drove down to Las Vegas and got to see one show, and one show only, and I didn't have the best seating. But when Elvis came out, I was just drawn to him.
He was so charismatic, people couldn't help but be drawn to him.
Well, over the years, I saw 72 concerts, and that included Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, the Oakland Coliseum, and the San Francisco Cow Palace.
There will always be something about Elvis.
But the main thing was to get closer to Elvis so you could get that kiss, get that scarf, have him talk to you, have that personal interaction.
There were women out there, young and middle-aged and old, that would have died to be with Elvis.
When Elvis would give me a kiss and a scarf, I felt like I had stuck my finger in a light socket. It was just that kind of feeling from within, and every fiber of your being just felt like you were just electrocuted. It was a kiss, a feeling, a touch that you just can't describe.
At the Las Vegas Hilton, in the suite, he tried to kiss me in the kitchen. And I was getting a bottle of water, and he put his hands up on the freezer and tried to kiss me. And I just kind of scooted out and went back, said, "Oh, Joe's waiting," and ran back to the bedroom. I'm not sure if Elvis was just testing me, but when I tell the story to Priscilla, she just laughs and said, "No, he wasn't testing you. He was really hitting on you."
And just the thrill of, you know, seeing Elvis and coming home from Las Vegas or coming home from Tahoe, and knowing that you just spent 5 days seeing Elvis night after night after night after night, and you know, having a squirt gun fight with him, or just, you know, hanging out with his friends.
They just loved him, and they still screamed his name and tried to run up for a kiss just to touch him.
After many attempts to find meaning in his life, his quest for love came full circle.
He woke up one day and he looked at me and said, "Man, I just had a dream you won't believe. I dreamt of Jesse, and I never dream about him, but I had this incredible dream. There we were, both of us, on the stage together, both wearing white jumpsuits, both had guitars. His hair was just like mine. I was looking at him, and I thought I was looking at myself. And the audience was screaming, and we were singing to them." He said, "To tell you the truth, I think his voice is better than mine."
He had grown as far as he could grow with what he had been given in his family dynamic. And he spent the rest of his life trying to break out of it, but being chained to it at the same time.
Even during his darkest times, women were still attracted to Elvis. Some tried to save him.
Linda was a Southern belle. Behind closed doors, she took care of him. If he was on sleeping pills, she'd be the one that would move the plate away from him and check on him in the middle of the night. To hear her and Elvis, it was almost like she would mother him. You know, she was more like a mother to him. And each and every one of the guys, they all say, everybody that knew Elvis and everyone that knew Linda, swear up and down that he would still be with us today if she was with him. Linda was a strong woman, and as much as she loved Elvis, she grew, just like Priscilla grew, just like Anne Margaret grew. These were strong women that outgrew Elvis, really, but they still loved him, but they just outgrew him.
From the time Elvis was 14, he became interested in 14-year-old girls. But even at the age of 42, he's befriending 14-year-old girls. Because of his immaturity, he's stuck. He's stuck at an age where he's looking for someone who's just a little bit younger than he is to kind of rear and become again a kind of protector, just as he was the man of the house as a young boy to his parents.
I've heard from a lot of fans that oh, we love to see that picture of you and Elvis because he was smiling and he seemed happy. He was happy. I mean, he like all of us, he had his ups and his downs. I mean, there was a lot of laughing. I mean, I was there in the last, 3 or 4 years of his life, and we had fun.
I think certain dates carried certain feelings. I think the time of her death, the actual date of her death, was always a concern with Elvis. I think it was a date he never passed without a remembrance, just as he would her birthday. He approached the age of 42, which was his known age of her age of death, even though it wasn't right. I think he felt he could very easily be at the end.
I will tell you this about Anne Margaret. I'm the one that called to tell her that Elvis had passed away. And out of all the people that I talked to, I think she took it harder than anyone. She literally hired a plane to fly her to the funeral because there was no way she was going to miss Elvis's funeral. And when I picked her up at the airport, I mean, she wasn't dressed all, fancy and all. She just had on a simple dress and had a shawl around her shoulders. And she was heartbroken. She was heartbroken.
The unconditional love of his fans supported Elvis over the years. While there were many, many women in love with Elvis, one is left guessing about Anne Margaret and what their special love could have become. Elvis Presley was a man that made the world swoon, but his heart belonged back in Tupelo, where he'd forged the bond with his one true love, his mother, Gladys.
His mother died. All hopes of living a normal life died with her.
His mom always filled his heart, and there wasn't much room for anyone else, I think. I don't know. You knew that. That's the kind of guy he was.
The beauty and the sadness were intertwined.
I don't understand not being able to be faithful to someone you love. And then we have, well, maybe he never loved anyone. I don't know.
I don't think that there was a woman on this earth that could be Elvis's true love.
For me, it was a deep love. I'll love Elvis till I die.
At night when I go to bed, I say my prayers to God and I say my prayers to Elvis Presley. Thank you for letting me do this all these years, and the people that I've met. It brings tears to my eyes.
If Elvis could hear me, I would, and I think he can, I would say I miss you and I love you so much, and I always will.